joined Stripe 5 years ago, actually, exactly 5 years ago in April 2014. I was the first Stripe employee based outside of the US. Stripe was a very different company back then. Stripe was 70 people, so our mission was very much the same. But the product, the people, and the structure were very different from what they are today. The whole company was around 70 people, mostly full stack developers based in San Francisco and a few remote engineers throughout the US. There was no org chart, no feedback cycles, not even any managers. We didn't need those at that point. Basically the point was when internal issues arose, people would just figure it out with the command machine. When external issues arose, it was like all hands on deck. Everybody was all hands on deck. That's kind of how it worked. The product was powerful, but still very focused on enabling US developers, instant access to credit card payments processing. So that was kind of worlds away from the kind of global payments and treasury network that we're building today. So looking at Stripe now, a lot of things have actually changed. So this picture is actually more than a year ago. I forgot to update this slide, but we're now a company of roughly 1,700 people across, operating in 26 countries, across 12 or 13 different offices, and with teams specializing in everything from financial partnerships to security infrastructure to machine learning. But the good thing, a lot of the good things that actually brought us here remain the same as a few years ago. One of the questions we're pretty obsessed about is the following. How do we scale the company in the way that we both maintain what's really important to us, but we still continue to increase the incremental output of every new employee? That's kind of what scaling is about, right? You want to be on the kind of green curve, not on the red one. So there's no secret sauce about this, and I guess every company needs to figure it out. So I'll just be sharing a few things we've been doing, which again doesn't mean it always works. So this is what we're going to be talking about. One of the most important lessons you guys might know from Pokemon is that you get stronger as you evolve. You have to evolve to get stronger. It's that kind of thing. This applies to us at Stripe as well. Not just the product, but also the people, the structure, the norms, and the processes. Some of those things, some of those words I just mentioned, usually get people pretty worried and weirdly worried. And we're going to come back to that. So as someone who's been part of this from the kind of early days, I want to share a few learnings. One, sequence your company DNA. Two, iterate your way to process. Three, get ready for growth. And four, preserve optionality. You'll be much happier later. So I'm going to go through each one of these. Start with one, sequencing your company DNA. So whether you're in Paris, San Francisco, Melbourne, Tokyo, London, there's something pretty unique that kind of brings all Stripes together and enable them to operate pretty efficiently. Now that didn't just happen. Nor did we just sit down back in 2012 and kind of build a master plan around that. Yet we somehow managed to create something pretty special that brings all these people together. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what that is, but one thing that I learned is that culture is much closer to gardening than it is to architecture. It requires consistent and deliberate attention, often on a small scale, and people sometimes underestimate that piece. The first thing we did was to kind of put down our operating principles on paper. So, what are operating principles? Operating principles are the foundation of the company culture. There should be fewer than 10. They should remain relatively consistent, whether you're a 10-person company or a 1,000-person company. They're kind of the core of who you are and who you want to be in the years to come. you should compare those to the Constitution. Like, think of it as the Constitution, as opposed to laws, rules, or justice decisions. Once you figure out the most important things, operating principles you value as usually a foundation, then you kind of write the rules and the norms around those, how to think about it. So creating these operating principles might feel like the hardest part of the journey. Obviously it's not. The reality is once you've agreed upon these, like how do you actually make them live and make them stick inside the company? Well, it's obviously critical that leaders and long-tenured employees embody these every day. But beyond that, the way you cultivate these values inside the company and continue scaling as such is kind of how skills are taught in the medical school. So see one, do one, teach one. So like first you start by seeing how things should be done. Then you kind of do it yourself. Then you kind of teach others how to do it. That's kind of how you instill these things in a company at scale. So for example, at Stripe, one of our operating principles is we haven't won yet. This definitely translates, for example, in our travel policies. So where for many years, and still now, when we travel, we share rooms. And that's kind of one way staying close as a team as well. This we haven't won yet thing is something that comes back pretty often. And this is something that Patrick talks a lot about. Patrick is Stripe's co-founder and CEO. Like you often see emails from Patrick, with a title such as "We haven't won yet," or "What I'm worried about." Like those are his favorite emails. So like literally, like he instills that in the company. So it's not like this. We haven't won yet. It's not only about letting ourselves, not getting complacent. It's also about pushing each other every day to do things in a better way. That's really how things got started. This is also one of the first things that Patrick talks about for every new class starting at Stripe on the first day. So living these kind of operating principles every day is when they truly become part of the DNA of the company. So let's talk about 2. Iterate your way to process. One of those bad words. So this is a topic that sets off a huge sense of dread amongst most people who enjoy working in a hyper-growth environment. Process. In fact, there's so much resentment about process that people tend to wait until it's way too late to start introducing some processes. They'll handle things as they come. Next thing you know, things start to break. And things start to move so fast, they start to break. So many new people, no one knows what to do, no one knows who to talk to, and people are afraid of asking where to go to get X information. There aren't resources, there aren't steps to follow. People are afraid to ask. Then inevitably, something goes wrong. A press release, a product launch, a bad hire, all those things. Next thing you know, instead of just introducing a small process change, you have to impose a massive top-down process that everybody hates. That's the place you don't want to end up in. When most of the time, all you need is something pretty simple. Because basically you want to make this organism work. So one way we started doing this was agreeing on kind of high-level goals for the company and how we were going to measure them. Once you agree on those big goals, you then get each team to kind of define their own objectives and goals that fit with that kind of company objectives. The way we do this is through what we call charters. Charters is a 2-page document that each team will produce with the objectives of the team, the mission of the team, the metrics of the team, and the main projects it's going to work on. The one thing to know is company planning, because that's what we're talking about here, is a super iterative process. You definitely won't get it right the first time around. I remember the first year we tried to do this, we missed all our goals. Partly because we hadn't moved fast enough, but partly also because we got the metrics totally wrong when we we're actually doing at the beginning of the year. So this takes time. The cycle time of this is a year. So you actually need a few years to get this thing right. I guess the important point here is you want to start early, because it's going to take you a few years to get it right. So start earlier than you think you need to start is the point. Something else, start small. Even lightweight processes can solve lots of problems and big problems for you. Here's an example. As we started growing really quickly, and we still wanted to kind of have executives review each offer of a new hire before it went out, we started to run into constraints because we were basically not able to kind of get their value. So to address this, we introduced a very simple Slack-based process to review applications that only takes 5 minutes. 1,700 people have been hired through this very simple process. This was super lightweight, and it's still running today. I'm not sure I've ever seen this one before. That's no problem. I know everybody wants to resist process. I do too. But here's the thing. If you don't do it at the right moment or early enough, it will be too late. And that's where you get back to this huge top-down process that I was mentioning before that everybody will hate and that nobody will want to follow. So start implementing small fixes to some of your big challenges early. In other words, start iterating your way to process. That's this point number 2. Next topic, get ready for growth. So in the early days, startups are usually super focused on getting the product market fit right. And eventually, they get it right. Now, the exciting and completely terrifying thing about achieving product market fit is that your product starts being used way beyond your imagination. So this is when you and your team get flooded by requests. You get requests from for support, you get requests for sales assistants for questions. You get messages in 50 different languages from around the world. You get questions that you never even remotely thought about before. And you're convinced that you will be able to solve this in the same way you solve for product market fit. Iterating and improving. People's intuitions are just wrong. There's product market fit and there's hypergrowth. The way you think about solving for those things are very different. You can't apply the same logic. You need to start thinking ahead, anticipating, doing capacity planning, resource planning, thinking about systemic improvements that scale across the organization. That's what high growth is about. Very different thinking than product market fit. So this one caught us by surprise in 2014, actually. So our growth got ahead of us, and we just couldn't keep up with the customer requests that were coming. We were trying to build the right support system, but at the same time, the support tickets kept piling up. So the short-term solution we found to this was that we created ticket dozers. Basically, everyone in the company, whether you were a lawyer, an engineer, a salesperson, or a marketer, was to do 20 to 25 support tickets every day. Or the CEO, by the way. Patrick was doing more. We had to do that to kind of bear with the massive influx of customer requests we were having. This, by the way, was very users first, but it didn't scale. One of the learnings for us was that as much as we wanted to, we just couldn't continue doing this ourselves. So realizing when you need to look at more creative solutions is also part of the equation here. For us, what this meant was investing in a vendor team that would be able to scale the support for us in additional time zones, additional languages, and faster than what we could be doing internally. And that was true mostly for the most kind of easy and quick questions to be answered. However, the important point here is even today, we actually continue doing lots of support internally. Why? Because if you want to continue scaling, and if you want to continue, pushing things out to vendors, for instance, you have to have done the job yourself. You have to have had that content, know how to respond to those questions, etc., to then get the vendors to do it themselves. It's kind of like a train-the-trainer kind of thing. So going from achieving product market fit to high growth is also where you need to start hiring more aggressively to sustain the growth. So up until a certain point, you certainly managed to hire talented people on your own, with your networks of other people, etc. But when you hit this high growth stage, that process gets much harder, much longer, and much more controversial. And the worst thing you could do is lower your bar, or recruit someone for a very short-term need. That's not someone who you actually need a year or two from now, because you want to be thinking ahead every time you make this hire. So this is when you actually start thinking about recruiting recruiters, and that becomes a good idea. This one actually took us by surprise as well in 2015. So they'll not only help you source talent and attract the right talent, they'll also kind of help with the kind of culture filter that you want through the interview process. So, for example, at Stripe, our recruiting team has all sorts of metrics around the candidate funnel. But the primary metric is actually around candidate quality. And one way we see this is our very best recruiters will start the kind of a panel, a feedback panel about candidates, like putting forward the issues or the challenges that they've seen addressed in the feedback that was given. Start with the negative. You want to make sure not to hide the negative, is basically the point, to keep your bar high. We're also pretty transparent about our operating principles. And the way we do this is that we send this document to every candidate who's interviewing the recruiting process. This document is basically a document that lays out our operating principles. And we ask them to read it. You'd be surprised by the number of conversations in the interview process that we actually have about this. You'd also be surprised about the number of people who actually drop out of the interview process because they want to drop out because they don't recognize themselves in this. That's actually pretty cool. Saves everybody time. And you'd rather actually have this earlier rather than later and have you hire the person, train the person, etc. So the last topic is preserve optionality. You'll be happy to hear about this. So in hypergrowth, you're never done scaling. The minute you think you fixed something, you're already starting to think about how to fix it for the next stage of growth. Think about office space, a very good illustrative example, right? The moment you moved into a new office space, you're already thinking about what the next one is going to be and looking for that one. Well, it's the same thing in every area, basically. So what do you want to optimize for as you scale? Well, the most valuable currency you'll ever have is optionality. In other words, you want to avoid making trapdoor decisions. Decisions that lock you into things. Because we all know how quickly the environment is evolving, and you want to be able to maintain optionality. So we all know those decisions. Some are worse than others. In fact, to try to avoid these types of mistakes, we have sort of a framework that helps us to categorize the type of decisions we're making on an everyday basis. It basically reads along two axes. How tunable or irreversible is the decision, and how much of an impact is this decision going to have? Let's spend a minute actually on this one. Let's take a few examples to make it real. Navigation on the website, important, hard to change, not trapdoor. Office seating arrangements, you can change those in 3 months, not trapdoor. Pricing, actually pretty easy to change, not trapdoor. Naming a product, pretty trapdoor. Acquiring the company, super trapdoor. Let's take another example. deciding to give people titles. Turns out that titles are pretty important to many people. So if you go down that path, then it's going to be hard to go back. This is actually quite tractable. I think most businesses make the mistake of overstructuring too early. And as the company grows, you need more people with different skill sets to cover a given function. As your team becomes more increasingly sophisticated, you also need to provide as much clarity as possible as to what people are doing. So, if you're a 50-person company, you want to avoid naming your first marketing hire the CMO. What happens a year later, you have a team of 20 marketers, and you're hiring someone more senior to manage the team? You name that person CMO as well. You take the CMO title away from the first one. How do you think that conversation is going to go? We try to avoid giving titles. For potential recruits, it's actually a good signal of someone who really wants to join. And I think you can get over the lack of a title, that'll get to culture. It can feel a little weird for some employees, but getting people used to the flexibility from the beginning is actually good. Because avoiding titles early on indicates that your organization will continue to grow and to evolve, and that you're not just stuck in one role. That's how we frame it. More generally, when thinking about the myriad of small decisions you're making in a day, think about this trapdoor, non-trapdoor framework. The trapdoor ones are the ones you want to be most careful with. So to wrap up, we've definitely made quite some mistakes over the past few years, but we have had a few learnings, and this is again very much applied to us in our experience. One, sequence your company DNA, write down those operating principles early, live them, show them, teach them aggressively. Two, iterate your way to process. Start small and introduce structure and lightweight processes before it's too late. Three, get ready for growth. Set yourself up for scale before you think you need to. Because it's going to take time to get it right. And four, preserve optionality. You'll be happy later. Avoid making those trapdoor decisions and try to preserve optionality as much as you can. So as we're setting off this next stage of growth, I expect us to be making many more mistakes and hopefully having a few more learnings that I'll be able to share, in the next upcoming event. Thank you very much.
When do you think is the right time to start really spending some time about thinking about culture? And yeah, could you share maybe a few examples of how the principles that you have kind of blended and emerge in the company and become kind of official? So how you start kind of officializing the culture?
Yeah. Okay. So I think so. This was very focused on kind of scaling, and scaling culture is part of it. I think in the early stages, and I was not there, right? So I'm sure people in the room have more experience than me here. But I distinguish the kind of early stages of really early stages of the company, like the first 5, 10, 15, whatever employees, where it's not really maybe culture, it's more like hiring people that you feel like you can actually spend, 18 hours per day, like working hard in a basement kind of thing, right? So it's more like hiring people that you have a specific fit. I think for me, the word culture and the concept of company culture, etc., really comes into play when you're thinking about, the scaling piece, right? How do you scale this from the early 20 employees to 1,000? So that kind of answers part of your question. I think
To the other point, I think the one example I like to take is when you kind of read our operating principle. So how do you officialize? Okay, so then there's a second piece, which is at what point do you say, oh, it looks like we have some sort of company culture here going on, and at what point do you actually start formalizing and writing those operating principles? I think we did it. We started doing that at 80, 90 people when I just roughly when I arrived. And I think that the tipping point was when you're doubling, more than doubling in size every year. And it's kind of very much linked to that need for scaling recruiting. So it's like, as long as you're recruiting on your own, like you can get that right. When you start depending on recruiting teams, etc., and need to scale the recruiting function, I think is the moment where you need to formalize a little bit more what the company culture is. I think that's what happens, right? If I remember correctly. And that work is, the way we did this, it's not like Patrick and John just sat down one evening and wrote those, operating principles. We actually kind of created a group of like 10 people, like a working group kind of thing, where it was recent people, less recent people, etc. We kind of came up with a version of it and ran it through Patrick and John. Now, to the last piece, I think one example of how this really translates every day is again, I'll talk about hiring for a second, because if you kind of cut across these operating principles, it pretty well defines what type of people in terms of personalities you hire for. And I find it pretty powerful because we look for people who are both humble and ambitious. And I think there's lots of humble people in the world. There's lots of ambitious people in the world. But the combination of the two is actually a very small, I think is a pretty small intersection. That's kind of one filter that we use like every day in the hiring process, for instance, that I think kind of talks pretty well to these principles. I can say why those two are important, but like that's kind of one I know.
Okay, it's very interesting, thanks. Another question that I had, and that refers a lot to my former experiences, who's kind of in charge of all this scaling stuff? Does it happen like bottom up? Like the processes, the idea just to submit to all candidates the values or your operating principles, or does it happen top down? Is there someone in charge of scaling this, or is it every kind of team leader in charge of that? How does everything emerge?
So I can talk about Stripe and how we worked at Stripe. And I would say that's the only way to do it. I think we really started looking into this when we hired Claire Johnson, who's our chief operating officer. Someone who had spent quite some time in fast-growing tech companies, and that was the point. She joined like 6-9 months after I did. That was the point where Stripe was 100 people, starting to scale, starting to go global, starting to be multi-product, starting to go into different segments. Like that's where you start to have all that complexity, starting to have lots of customer user requests. And I mean, she basically brought this to Stripe, which is the thing we need to get right now between 100 and 200 employees is scale. Like we need to learn scale. And so I think that it was triggered by her, basically. So she's not like, she's our COO, so she does much more things. But across, if you look at all the kind of functions she owns, those are the very high, those are the functions that require lots of scale. hiring.
Do you put kind of specific incentives for that so that the team come up with ideas, processes, and so on?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, I think it's. It came from leadership. It came from her and a few others who in everything we were doing, in all the kind of charters and everything. The angle was, does this scale? Does this scale? Does this scale? Kind of thing. So it's kind of that music you need to kind of repeat and repeat and repeat to make sure people start thinking differently about how to do things. And I think that's the kind of switch. Now, again, like that's the switch of mindset. It can only happen when you have product market fit, strong product market fit. So let's not mix those two things, right? There's product market fit, and then there's hyperscale growth. But I think it's again that's driven by leadership and everything that comes with that. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I remember when I was a CEO of a very fast-growing company. Every morning I was wondering what is the wall I'm going to hit today, and how can I reduce the speed at which I will hit the wall today. So I hit quite a few walls. Are there some examples of walls that you guys have hit, or you personally, as when scaling Stripe in France and in Europe, and or ways you avoided that?
Well, I think I mentioned a few. The kind of support we hit a customer support wall in 2014. That was pretty bad. Like when you think about the entire company, you're asking your lawyer to be answering users about payment scheme questions. Like it's not a really good place to be in. So that was a pretty big wall. I think another one when I think about me personally is payments is oddly cultural. And so there's not that many tech businesses that are so local in terms of products. I don't know if you guys know this, but in Germany nobody pays by card. In the Netherlands nobody pays by card. In Asia nobody pays by card. In most markets, like it's a very local product. This is not like Google search, and so kind of as the first person trying to figure out what to do outside of the US, the wall was kind of like, oh, we need to do very different things. And this is not your Twitter, Facebook, Google kind of global scaling type like easiness, if I may say. And how to kind of feed that back to teams at HQ, how to get the company mindset to switch from US to global. You're now a global company. Oh, by the way, there's time zones, so let's not make those meetings at 3 a.m. in the morning in Paris time. Like all those kind of switching from a US domestic market company to a global company is, I think, one wall that I've experienced quite a bit. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. One question that's always a bit difficult to address when we're in boards with company scaling is, how do you build a management team? I know you guys don't have titles. That's what you said, or there used to be no org. It seems now that there are some titles. How do you build the management? So the management team, what is the kind of are there some kind of rules on promote versus hire? You can see yourself, I think you can be seen as a promotion, but you can also be seen as an hire, external hire by the guys who were there before you. So are there some principles behind that?
Yeah. So there's several topics there, but so on the kind of leadership hiring, the one thing to have in mind is that leadership hiring is well, obviously very hard. But even when you think you hire the right person, the odds are like 60% chances or something like that that it doesn't work out with that person. Like there's no type of hire that doesn't work as often as leadership hiring. It's very hard, is what I'm trying to say. So basically, what you see a lot of leadership hiring is lots of, you need to get it right and it takes time. Okay, so that's the first point. Second point is on the kind of internal versus external. You're always like the trade-off here is, recognizing and rewarding strong performers who deserve, to get a promotion, internal mobility. You want to promote internal mobility, but also like in hyperscale, like you're hiring. We're hiring today. Like we're 1,700 people in the company. Like a year from now will be whatever number it is, 3,500. So like the person you're hiring now, the person you're making the search for right now, it's going to take you, a few months to find that person. It's going to have a notice period. Then he's going to start. He's not going to be operational day one. It's going to take him 6 months to be operational. You're already a year out. So you're hiring today the person who's going to have to manage a company that's twice the size of the one that you have today. So the mental exercise you need to be doing when you think about leadership hiring is, how can I hire the person I will need, not now, not in a year from now, in 2, 3 years from now. And so it's kind of this mental exercise of where are we going to be in 3 years from now? And so let me hire that person. And this is true for leadership hiring. It's also true for not necessarily leadership. And so that's the one that's harder. Like that's the one that's harder. Back to the trade-off, harder to solve with internal promotion. Because basically that's something you won't necessarily get from people who are in the company today. So it's a balance, right? You want to you're going to want to. We have no magic number like 50-50 or 40-60, but it's very much based on who you have to promote internally. What are the roles you want to hire for, and what are the critical skills that are missing? And so for that one, let's maybe go external.
And apart from the founders, is there today in the let's say C-level team of Stripe any of the kind of first 50 employees?
There are two.
Two.
Yes, there are two. Yes. Actually, there are two, and they were at the top. They were the first 10 employees, I think it was. Yeah. And they were already very experienced people who joined the fund very early at Stripe. That also means that there's, I don't know how many, 4 or 5 who joined since. I think I was looking at that picture again, actually at the beginning, where it's kind of like, on that picture where we were like, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 people, there aren't that many people remaining, which brings me back to the point of, you can't really count for the culture scaling, you can't really count only on the early employees, because at some point, they're gone. So that thing about, training the trainer is pretty key.
Cool. Last question on my side. I'm a bit surprised that you don't really talk about data. It's a bit counterintuitive for me because when you do SaaS, everybody needs to be very data driven, and I know you are. And no, I generally advise to the founders we have at founders to really put data very high in the priority, data as a skill very high in the priority of the people that they hire, and put something around data in really hard in the culture of the company.
Yeah, so I didn't specifically mention data because this was not meant to be exhaustive. There's many things I didn't mention. We are a very data-driven company, and I agree with you. Like especially in SaaS businesses, you have that ability to be very data-driven. That actually, when I think about data, that's also one of those teams that we really started scaling fast at that moment. It's part of those teams that you need to be scaling fast at some point. Because fast growth means you need to make trade-offs, so therefore you need to make the right decisions, and the right decisions you can make them only with the right data, kind of thing. But yeah, no, data is a pretty key piece of how we. I think one of our operating principles was thinking rigorously. That's what the data piece is.
All right, thanks. Any questions now, maybe from the room here?
Do you have a view of the yearly turnover, employee turnover?
So I actually don't really know the. Oh yeah, I'll repeat the question. You have a view of the yearly employee turnover. That's right. I don't have the number. We don't generally share those things either. What I will say is, it's not very high. Like people tend to figure out. Sorry, no.
More people get in than people go out.
Yes.
For sure.
Oh yes, for sure. Yes, for sure. I think the interesting piece about retaining is the question here. I mean, there's many interesting pieces. Culture is one, and there's many pieces. But it's this idea that you never leave a company, you leave a manager. And so as you scale, especially in a hypergrowth environment, and as you make those internal hires, usually in the middle management type area, and as you sometimes make them earlier than what you would do in a less fast-growing company, you need to make sure that those new managers, do their job well, right? And so that's an area of investment that you should not underestimate. Like the whole management, group of people, you want to spend the time, the money, everything on that, because they are going to be your best talent retainers more than anything else.
So you talked about the importance of sequencing your DNA, and then you talked about you talked about the importance of sequencing your DNA as a company, and then you talked about optionality. So the world keeps changing. So what makes you scale the culture if the culture that you set up is not working anymore?
Well, I think, so the question is around trading off sequencing your DNA, which seems to be a pretty static thing, versus maintaining optionality in a highly, evolving world, and how do you kind of match those two things. I think, the operating principles you want to set up should be true for a 10%, 100%, 1,000% company. If you look back at even Amazon's kind of values and operating principles, those were the same.
We're not talking about the size of the company, but the world that keeps changing. I mean, the culture is not going to be.
So I think that's the basis. I think we have evolved them slightly, but it's always at the fringe. It's kind of like how would we rephrase how would we reframe this operating principle, given the new world we're in, given that we're more people, given that we have more challenges. And so it's more about rephrasing, putting an emphasis on how to change those than fundamentally saying, hey, we used to be a data-driven company, and now we're not going to think rigorously anymore, kind of thing. So it's very much, it's very much evolution versus revolution. It's like we kind of changed. And by the way, for the optionality piece, I think we started off with 6 operating principles. We now have 8. Never said we would never have more than less than 6, right? So you can kind of make those rules up as you go. So.
As you become a global company with presence in several countries, how do you ensure that people working, for example, in Stripe in France, in Paris, have a sense of belonging to the same company as Stripe, Tokyo, or other cities in the world? And do you need physical corporate events to do that?
Yeah, so the question is, global company, how do you make sure there's a sense of belonging, whether you're in, Paris, Melbourne, or any other offices? Well, I think, so there's no one solution. I think it's see this as a combination of things. I think this, culture piece is a big piece of it. I think getting people together once per year, like we're still doing that. Like we have this annual conference called Convergence where people converge to San Francisco once per year. I think, the all hands, every 2 weeks we have a company all hands. It was actually half an hour ago where like the company comes together, Patrick, there's all sorts of updates. I think all those are important. I think the interesting piece around scaling globally in different offices is the company culture versus local culture. So it's kind of like, how do you avoid the French office to become like French bureaucratic, the worst of France kind of thing inside a company that's not that way kind of thing. And I think that the simple rule there is company culture takes over, is the overarching thing, and you should make sure that in your offices you kind of instill some rituals and those kind of things that mimic, the whole thing. Now, the solutions are not necessarily the same, but the idea and what it represents is the same. So, we're celebrating, whatever, I think it was the 9 years of Stripe, or 8th anniversary of Stripe, and I don't know, we did it with my album year and whatever, but those rituals I think are important.
I have a small question about process. So you touched a little bit on how you guys put processes in place, and it seemed to be sort of a mix between leadership, putting stuff in place, filtering it down, and then sort of when you were talking about charters, how there's some things that are actually created by the lower down people and brought up. So what's the balance for you guys, particularly in the context of high growth, loads of new people, and world opposites? How do you structure that?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you, in terms of processes and planning in particular, how do you make the top-down stuff versus the bottom-up stuff, and how's that work? The reality is people, especially again in fast-evolving, fast-growing environments, people expect a lot from the founders to give the direction, and people expect it more than what we think is basically the point. And so the way we do it is, the leadership team, founders, set kind of what are the big priorities, with some sort of bottom-up thing, like the big company priorities, and then it's kind of trickles down. We're like, okay, so now with you team, you understand the big picture now, you understand where we're going, how are you fitting into that? And so that's where the charters come into play. So it's very much top-down driven, because we need this focus as a company across 12 offices and 5 different customer segments and 27 different products, and it's very complex. Basically, complexity kind of is exponential. So you need this kind of top-down direction, and then each team kind of builds its own plan to be consistent. Now, the interesting thing, the hard thing to solve for is the interdependencies. So hey, you team, you're building a plan, but guess what? To do that, you need my team's help, but I need to know that you're doing that so that I can put it in my charter kind of thing. So the charter exercise actually forces that cross-functional alignment, because otherwise you have people basically committing to charters that they end up not being able to do because they were depending on this other guy that didn't know they had to do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's actually, you were talking top down. I'd say it's almost more of a
cross-functional thing that you solve for someone.
Is there anything that you guys do that facilitates that those cross-functional conversations? Because I think a lot of companies who are at scale, you just get terrible side of it, both geographically and also between different department streams. So what do you guys do to kind of solve?
There's the two classic things we play around with and we like change every 6 months is forums. Like, it's if you wish, but forums and the idea of virtual teams. So like you have a specific scope project that requires X functions to work on. Let's kind of ring fence in some way or manner the right people in each different function to drive that thing. That's the two things you generally end up playing around with. As for this, as for that, and but that's pretty iterative. Sure.
And how do you ensure that those things are happening across geographies as well? Because even like I can imagine all of that happening in one thing in San Francisco, and then people in continental Europe being like, hi, we want to say, can we have a chat with you guys too? Yeah, sure, 3 a.m. Like, how do you?
Yeah, so it's funny because it's I think we have more and more of these, I'd say, distributed companies where not like the notion of an office is becoming less, like the physical presence is becoming less important than what it used to be. And so I think I don't know, I'm sure it's not only us, but I think we're able to kind of abstract away the advantage of being in the same office. And that that kind of works pretty well. I think yes, time's a thing. Like if you need APAC and US, then Europe, someone's gonna get the wrong time. But yeah, we generally try to not have it free. Coming to the project, yeah.
I think we're going to take maybe a last question before grabbing the beer. And I think we have a hard stop at 9, I guess. So
That right? Yeah, maybe 9, yeah. Next question. Yeah.
We were discussing about processes, who eventually make the decision and tell us, the whole company, that this is the way things are going to work out.
Yeah. So the other key in hypergrowth mode is how do you make sure you're able to push decision-making power as low as possible. Like, you started off in people, founders were making all the decisions. If that continues being the case at 100, it doesn't work. We actually, we hit that wall also. This whole idea, again, of the charters, of the company goals, etc., the whole idea of that is to actually empower people to be able to take decisions, right, without needing to check if it's the right thing. So I know it's aligned with the company goals, I know the values, think rigorously, I know all those things, but I'm able to take this decision, and that's kind of how you do it. That's true for the processes, but it's true for whatever else. And I think that's actually pushing decision-making problem. Pushing the ability to make decisions as slow as possible in the org is another topic I could have talked about here. But it doesn't just happen. I think you kind of have to instrumentalize it with things I mentioned before.
thank you so much, Guillaume.
Thank you, Louis.
Yeah.